And we're live.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lisa.
Hey, Josh. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dark Ozarks, and it's Wednesday night.
Yeah, it's and we have some fun stuff to talk about,
We do.
including Josh's ongoing war with Missouri pollen.
You do sound a lot better than you did Saturday. So
Yes, I do. I and I am grateful for that. For Saturday was a big event for Dark Ozarks and a lot of fun.
yes, and the subject of tonight's talk.
Yes. Oh, roughly speaking, the Civil War ghosts, um, of which there are uh, many in
Yeah,
Newtonia.
there are literal and metaphorical.
Agreed. And so for people who might not be familiar, let's give a little bit of a rundown on what we did in Newtonia on Saturday night.
Okay. We had a public event tour for people to learn the history, tour the home, actually get a demonstration of a paranormal investigation, as well as tour the Civil War cemetery.
Yes.
And we had a huge crowd,
Yes, we did.
kind of rivaling the population of Newtonia. And we've gotten a lot of really good feedback. One thing I do want to address, we got questions today on the post about tonight. Someone saying they'd love to see what we did, if there's video, etc. Maybe in the future, but part of that was for the people who were there to get that experience because the money was going to the house.
Yes. And something I think also is important. We, Dark Ozarks, Paranormal Science Lab, State of the Ozarks, are very committed that what we do not only raises awareness for historical locations and awareness for our region, but raises actual money for these locations whenever possible. And so incredibly gratifying that on Saturday night, the support of a lot of people willing to come out, in some cases drive quite a ways, because Newtonia is not in an urban center.
No, it's not. And we had people driving for, I know several people drove for over 2 hours to get there. So
yes, and to see all of that come together and know, and of course this is what we're sharing with everybody else, know that, and if you were there at the Ritchie Mansion on Saturday night, your efforts directly go to helping preserve this site for future generations. And to me, that is what makes all the rest of this really, really worth it.
Same for me. It really is. That is the bread and butter of why we do this. And but for people's curiosity, the little it's really a hamlet at this point of Newtonia. Is we were talking earlier before we went live, as you said, 15 miles straight east from Neosho, Missouri.
Yeah.
And there's not much around it, but it was vitally important during the Civil War.
It was, and that is such a testament really to the early road systems.
Yes.
And Granby.
And Granby. And I think that the story doesn't make any sense if you don't understand that. The roads through Newtonia went to Neosho, went to Granby, and to Sarcoxie. Neosho and Sarcoxie were prominent commercial centers, but Granby, which actually isn't very far away, it's about 5 miles away, was the oldest lead mining town in Southwest Missouri, and was very vital to the war effort for whoever controlled it. Actually, the amount of lead that went out of Granby, I mean, it was staggering. Like 250,000 tons per month, and basically supplied all the munitions for the Western Theater for whoever controlled it.
It's one of those things, it's very easy to get lost in the minutia of detail until you simply bring it down. And this was referenced in some of our notes, and it's even referenced today. You can drive through Granby, and to get to the Ritchie Mansion, you turn onto Mill Street.
Yeah.
And something as simple as bread and bullets.
Exactly, because one thing that was going on, it became more pronounced later, but in the early parts of the war, this area, and particularly soldiers trying to operate in this area, were starving.
Yes. And that actually necessitated a lot of the first transition, which led to the first Battle of Newtonia in 1862.
Yes.
That Confederate troops, following Sterling Price's move to Southwest Missouri and then into Northwest Arkansas, that thousands of Confederate or Confederate-leaning or Missouri and anti-Union troops suddenly found themselves having traversed to be with the Army. They're in Northwest Arkansas, and they're running out of food. They're also running out of forage for their horses.
Yes. So the area was important because it provided forage, it provided lead for ammunition, and it provided flour. So this tiny little spot on the map became very crucial. And the Matthew Ritchie house, which is a beautiful antebellum house,
Yes.
basically had a front row seat to not one, but two battles.
Yes, it did. Obviously, as with so many of the conflict engagements during the war in Missouri, a lot of the engagements were comparatively small, as opposed to what we're accustomed to with
Right.
places like Vicksburg or Shiloh or Manassas in the Eastern Theater or the Western Theater. Also important for people to understand, we're essentially talking about three separate theaters of the Civil War. Eastern Theater, the Eastern States. Western Theater was actually the Western Deep South. And then the Trans-Mississippi Theater, which was us across the Mississippi River. And while these engagements were small, many of the engagements in Missouri were small in comparison to places like Chickamauga or Shiloh, Manassas, or Antietam,
Pittsburgh, etc.
Yes, they weren't small in terms of the human impact that it had on the surroundings. And in many cases, they weren't small in regards to the larger strategic impact that in some cases they had on the entire war.
That's very, very true. And Newtonia is a good example of that with the role of Indian Territory and the tribes. One of the very few instances that you actually had Indian units on both sides fighting each other. And it was the result of a very complicated dynamic between tribes and internal conflict in some of the tribes.
Very much so.
Division. And again, very quickly in the war, you ended up with over 10,000 refugees from Indian Territory. so that, they were starving. And so you had all of that dynamic aside from the regular armies that were dealing with food,
Yes.
food issues. And it all kind of culminated at the first battle of Newtonia. And then you have to look at it from the perspective of, the family who, they left while the battle was going on. When they came back, they described it as being littered, the yard being littered with cannonballs.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't walk across the yard without stepping on one. It's just hard to imagine.
It really, really is. And I absolutely agree. Hamlet is a perfect name, perfect term for Newtonia, past and present. Hamlet is also one of my favorite words in the English language, so it's I love that. But it is a very apt description. And something I rather love, obviously Newtonia looks quite a bit different than it did in the 1860s. But just as an example, there's two elements to this. One, the town has always been quite small.
Yes.
And so, it us adding 100 people on Saturday night is actually a substantial temporary bump in the population. You don't get to do that in a lot of locations.
Very true. Very true.
But between the two battles, in the autumn of 1862 and then the autumn of 1864, total casualties were over 900.
Yeah, and which is several times the population of the town. So a lot of things happened there. And the second battle of Newtonia actually is the last battle fought in Missouri.
Yes, and one of the very last battles, not the last battle, obviously, but one of the very last battles in the tail ends of the war.
And it really was.
One of the things in terms of reading the accounts, the Ritchie family chose the location for the mansion in part because of the spring branch, the proximity to clean water.
Right, which runs beside the house, yeah.
And just as a general point of observation, then we'll get into the ghosts. But so many times doing historical research, you have the opportunity to read, these sort of founding accounts. And it will talk about, the springs or the spring branch or the creek or whatever. And then you go to the location, contemporarily, and you suddenly realize how much the landscape has been changed by modernization. In some cases, springs and spring branches drying up entirely because of water usage, that they or being diverted or being covered over. And it's very difficult to stand in those locations and try to imagine, well, they would have done this, or this occurred here, or that sort of thing. And in all fairness, driving in to Newtonia on Saturday night from Neosho, after being held up by the freight, driving in, turning on Mill Steep, driving down, all of a sudden I realized I'm crossing the spring branch.
Yeah.
And it's April. The watercress is green. It is flowing. And I just got this huge smile on my face. And I'm like, this is the spring branch. This is the spring branch that the Matthew family, this is what it would have been like.
And that's what they saw when they decided this is where we're building.
And I looked at that and I'm like, it all of a sudden, all the pieces make sense. And whether it's paranormal research or whether it's historical research, just like with your, bread and your bullets,
Mhm.
if you know what the pieces are, suddenly everything just starts to make sense. And all of these complex, transcendent historical issues whatsoever just really start to make perfect sense in the modern world and in our minds as well, because we're really all basically just the same people.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we really are. Yeah, it's a good example of where that happens. And I think that's part of the reason, that there are those ghosts of the past, whether, it's those metaphorically like you're describing, or the more literal ghost stories.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
the past and present are so clear and not um, separated.
No, they're really not. So before we close this video, and for people who are curious, we do videos live on YouTube now. We also do videos live on Facebook. You can follow us on both live videos, catch the live video during the filming, and then also catch the recordings.
Chris. Yeah.
Before we
Still more extensive videos of the same subjects. Recorded.
Yes. And we're going to be going into a lot of depth on the next video, which will be on Facebook. But of course, we do encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate that very, very much. Also, comment. Please feel free to comment. Let us know topics you'd like us to check out, things that you're curious about, things about history, things about the paranormal you're curious about. I actually have my Richie Mansion mug.
Alex was jealous that you got another one.
They're some of my favorite coffee mugs.
There you go.
And that, but before we go, whether we're talking about the mansion at Newtonia or just the Civil War in general, do you have a favorite ghost story that jumps out for you in regards to the Civil War?
Well, there are several, but I really do have to admit that one of my favorite is at Ritchie Mansion with who we presume is the first Mrs. Ritchie.
Yes.
And she definitely seems to be present and rather intense in the space. I've had a couple of experiences. The first time I was actually in the house, had an EVP of who I think is her. I was being taken through the house, and I was interviewing a docent who was dressed in reenactment clothing as a Confederate. And the Ritchies were staunch Union men, and we hadn't been in the house 5 minutes, and we're standing in the dining room, and clear as a bell, there's a woman who says, "Get out of my house." And I don't think she was talking to me or to the photographer with me. I think she was referring to the reenactor, because she,
Yes.
wasn't taking kindly to who she perceived as a Confederate in her home. But she's been seen by a number of people, and probably the most credible story comes from law enforcement. And about 15 years ago, the Drug Task Force was assembling for a raid, and when they do that, they all meet up together, get ready together, and leave. And they do it someplace that's not conspicuous, so people aren't watching. And so they had stopped in front of the house, and while they're getting ready, one of the guys looks up and says, "Hey, look up there." And on the second deck of the porch, they all saw the image of a woman in period clothing. It was detailed enough that they could see the folds of the dress, etc., but transparent enough that they could see through her. And she was just staring at them. And I've actually heard that from two different officers over time. So my assumption is Mrs. Roche was standing there going, "What are you doing on my front yard? Hopefully there's no more cannonballs." But
Yes.
that's probably my favorite.
I love that. I love that. And of course, we look forward to getting back to the Ritchie Mansion,
Yeah.
conducting more investigation, and hosting more gatherings. So please follow Dark Ozarks here. Event information will just join us on this rather fun process and journey as we dig into as many things in the Ozarks and the Ozark borderlands that go bump in the night, and look at the history that's behind all of it as well.
And we appreciate y'all. And
Yes, we
we'll
do.
be back live next week.
Thank y'all, and thank